Russian President Vladimir Putin signs documents to annex 4 partially occupied regions of Ukraine, but the West and Kyiv have said they will not recognise the move.
NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg says the alliance supports Ukraine's right to decide its future.
Hurricane Ian hit South Carolina after causing tremendous destruction in Florida, where authorities don't know how many have died. Is this the start of a new stage in the war in Ukraine? Russian President Vladimir Putin launched the process to annex 4 Ukrainian regions that it partly occupies, after referendums in the areas labelled a sham by Western countries. He called for peace talks, but only on Russia's terms.
We urge the Kyiv regime to cease their fire, stop the war it started in 2014, and renew negotiations. We are ready for negotiations. We have said this many times. However, the choice that the people of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson have made is not subject to discussion. Russia will not betray this choice.
The Moscow-appointed leaders of the 4 regions were also present in the Kremlin to sign the documents. Earlier, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appealed for ordinary Russians to end the war.
Everyone in the world understands what such an attempt at annexation would actually mean. It will not mean what the Kremlin hopes for. But to stop this, you'll have to stop Vladimir Putin in Russia, who wants war more than life, your life, the citizens of Russia.
Russia can now claim that attempts to push them out of Ukraine are attacks on Russia itself. Some fear that this could lead to a deadly escalation in the conflict, one which Putin himself hinted may even go nuclear.
The NATO military alliance has given its response to Ukraine's announcement that it plans to submit an application for emergency membership.
Every democracy in Europe has the right to apply for NATO membership, and NATO allies respect that right. And we have stated again and again that NATO's door remains open. We support Ukraine's right to choose its own path, to decide what kind of security arrangements it wants to be part of. Then a decision on membership, of course, has to be taken by all 30 allies, and we take these decisions by consensus. Our focus now is on providing immediate support to Ukraine, to help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian brutal invasion.
Thank you very much.
The NATO chief said that Russia's formal annexation of the Ukrainian territories doesn't change the nature of the conflict.
With questions from
the EU Commission has asked member states to reduce the number of visas given to Russians. In the wake of Moscow's impending annexation of 4 partially occupied Ukrainian territories, it seems the EU is upping its security measures towards Russians.
Member states need to do a very thorough security assessment, and if a person could be a security threat or be a threat towards the international relation for some of the member states, this person should not be issued a visa. If a person, a Russian citizen, intends to stay longer than 90 days in the EU, he or she should not be issued a visa.
An estimated 200,000 Russian citizens have fled to neighbouring countries since Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a partial mobilization of reservists. Finland closed its border completely to Russians with tourist visas on Friday, citing security concerns. For now, the Kremlin has not prevented its citizens from leaving the country. However, it seems that many bordering states are acting before Russia does.
The election in Brazil may have consequences for the implementation of the trade agreement between the EU and the Mercosur. In 2019, the 2 blocs signed a trade agreement considered to be the world's largest at the time. The Mercosur is the 5th largest economy in the world outside the EU, With an annual output of 2.2 trillion euros, its population is of 260 million people, and the EU exports 45 billion euros in goods annually to Mercosur. For it to come into force, all member states need to ratify the agreement. But this has not happened yet. Under pressure from Paris, Brussels now wants guarantees that the Amazon forest will not be destroyed in favour of the expansion of the South American grain and cattle producers.
The Macron government has a legitimate position against the agreement in theory, because of environmental issues. So additional commitments are being negotiated. But once those environmental and additional commitments are eventually agreed upon, there is no more excuse not to start the ratification process. Because right now the agricultural arguments have not been put on the table, not even in France, to prevent the initiation of the ratification process.
Deforestation figures in Brazil have increased since the election of Jair Bolsonaro, as have budget cuts to environment-related federal agencies.
There's a very significant reduction in the rate of deforestation between about 2004 and 2012. It comes down about 80%, which shows that when there's political will, there is an infrastructure in place for Brazil to monitor and to deter and to curb the rate of deforestation.
The deal with Mercosur sets environmental targets for all of its signatories. Many countries in the EU, for example, are also far from their own CO2 targets.
Another month and another record inflation number. Prices in the Eurozone rose by 10% in the 12 months to September. In comparison, just a year ago, prices were rising at only 3.4%. Once again, the biggest driver of inflation was energy, rising by 40% in 12 months. Food, alcohol and tobacco were also big drivers, although less than in previous months. But the trip to the pumps may continue to be painful for some time. The war in Ukraine has disrupted global oil and gas supply. Europe is heading into a hard winter, which may include forced reductions in energy as countries struggle to cope with the scarcity of gas. The worry is if energy inflation continues to remain high, it will lock in price rises in other sectors of the economy, perhaps for the long term.
A week of economic turmoil. The pound continued to fall on Friday as the UK government confirmed its economic forecast won't be published until late November, potentially prolonging market volatility and financial uncertainty. This is despite talks held between Prime Minister Liz Truss, Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng and the Office for Budget Responsibility on Friday, in a move commentators say hoped would reassure the markets. Last week's so-called mini-budget saw the UK government bypass the fiscal watchdog to reveal plans to stimulate growth by slashing taxes, which unsettled the markets and caused the pound to plummet. The Bank of England was forced to launch a historic emergency intervention, announcing plans to buy €74 billion worth of UK bonds in a bid to restore economic stability. The government plans were also criticised in a rare and damning interjection from the International Monetary Fund, who said they predict the move will increase inequality.
Hurricane Ian's raw power has reached South Carolina. It's now a Category 1 hurricane. US President Joe Biden has declared an emergency to free up resources and aid for the population. Ian's path through Florida was also devastating. Authorities don't know yet how many have died.
The situation in Florida is far more devastating. We're just beginning to see the scale of that destruction. It's likely to rank among the worst of the nation's and the worst in the nation's history. You have all seen it on television, homes and property wiped out. It's going to take months, years to rebuild.
Many roads and other vital infrastructure have been left ruined as Ian smashed through the state. The governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, has said that crews went door to door to over 3,000 homes in the hardest hit areas in order to help survivors. Surrounded by destruction and trapped in their own homes, many were unable to call for help as electricity and mobile networks remain down.